Hello and welcome to West Country Wanderings. Welcome back to Coolmore. I'm on Bodmin Moor at the moment, and this behind me here is Crowdy Reservoir, built by the Mid and North Cornwall Water Board in 1973. It's now managed jointly by South West Water and the South West Lakes Trust. Just to the edge of this reservoir here, which is one of three reservoirs on Bodmin Moor. One of the others is Sibleyback and the other one is Colliford. They're bigger than this one, but this has a nature reserve by the side of it, and it also has brown trout in it too. It now provides water for much of North Cornwall, towns like Bude, Wadebridge and Camelford, which of course get very, very busy as we go into the summer season. But that's not the only reason I've come here today. To the north of this reservoir is RAF Davidstow, or rather was RAF Davidstow, on Davidstow Moor, and that has a lot of interesting secrets to tell. So why not join me again for another tour here in Cornwall on West Country Wanderings. So I've now come on to the top of the dam. Now, unlike a lot of the reservoirs that are owned by South West Water, you are allowed on the dam on this one. Don't recommend going in that water though. Apart from being very cold, there are hidden obstacles in it, so it's really not a good idea to do that. In fact, there are warning signs telling you about that here. Surprisingly, the water here is quite choppy, almost sea-like, with the waves coming up. Obviously the waves just created by the wind, not by any tides of course, but it does have almost a seaside feel to it, complete with its own beach, which we'll go and have a look at now. So welcome to Crowdy Beach, the beach in Cornwall you've probably never heard of. Well, it's not a beach of course, it's just a little shoreline of this fantastic little reservoir here. Before the reservoir was built in 1973, humans came here much before here. The Cornwall Archaeological Service in the 70s, before the reservoir was built, did some excavations around this site, and they found some Iron Age tools believed to have been aged between 6,000 and 10,000 years ago. So you can just imagine people making this home here on Bodmin Moor on a very windswept but high location. Now, just on the shoreline here at Crowdy Reservoir is this boathouse and slipway. I think this is utilised by what is now South West Water to help manage the reservoir. So they probably store a boat in there. They need to go out and examine the off shoreline on the other side of the reservoir, or indeed some other parts of the dam here, which is just keeping this water in bay. Unfortunately, I can't find out the exact capacity of this reservoir. They seem to keep that kind of little bit secret. If you do know how many gallons or litres of water that this reservoir holds, then I'd love to hear from you. Now, it's hard to imagine now that this was once a very busy airfield. In fact, I'm standing on part of the runway of the former RAF Davidstow Moor, which was built for the Second World War around 1940-1941. So you would have had Spitfires and Hurricanes using this very ground here. The site now is surrounded by trees and it's managed by Forestry England. You also have a number of shallow pools for nature conservation too. But that's not the only part of this runway which you can see as you explore further around it, close to the tiny little hamlet of Davidstow here in North Cornwall. So let's have more of a wander. Now, if you come round to the other side of the airfield, you'll see the remains of lots of old buildings from when it was here in RAF days. This is an air raid shelter, probably much needed, although Cornwall thankfully didn't have much bombing by the Luftwaffe during the Second World War, apart from some bombing in the town of Falmouth, some 40 miles to the southwest of here. But yes, this is a fabulous site to explore around these wonderful old buildings on Bodmin Moor. Now, as you know, my channel isn't known for urbex, urban exploration or anything like that, going around buildings and trespass. I couldn't resist though coming into this, which is an old building on the airfield. I don't know what it was originally used for. I can tell you now it's used as an impromptu sheep barn. There's even bits of sheep bone lying around there, which is a bit, yeah, so I'm not quite sure what's gone there, but you can certainly make out the old Ministry of Defence fence, which is long since life expired here. Now, it is a little sad to see the buildings, the RAF buildings that once helped fight our battle against the Luftwaffe, our story of the Second World War here in Cornwall in England, to see them in this very dilapidated state. There is a nearby museum actually between here and the Davidstow Cheddar Creamery, which is just to the far corner of the airfield. You're probably familiar with the Davidstow Cheddar. If you look in your local supermarket, it's a very large creamery there, so if I can get a shot of that. But yeah, it'd be nice to have seen some of these preserved and to see some interpretive boards around that to give you some context of what we're actually looking at. But as I say, what I'll do is I'll insert some, if I've got some old photographs that I can find, and also I'll put in some subtitles and maps to give you some context too, so while I got the shots. But there is a really good museum. I'm not going to have time to visit it today, unfortunately, but if you are interested in this site and you are in the area, then I highly recommend a visit to the museum, the reviews of which are outstanding. It's a very hands-on museum, and although it's not as slick as other museums you might see, it really is giving you a lot of the history of what happened here at RAF Davidstow Moor. Now, there are a few other YouTube videos on YouTube platform, of course, showing you this, mainly just webcam footage of cars driving around. I'll come back to that about cars. And they do tend to focus on the abandoned air control tower, which still stands. It's heavily graffitied there. There are some vehicles over there, so there are people around there. So that's why I didn't decide to film over in that direction. I'll see if I can get a shot of it with my telephoto lens. So insert that so you can see what that is like. The airfield itself, though, isn't entirely abandoned. Although I can't see any airfield activity on there, there is a windsock and there are a few signs dotted around the airfield telling that it is still a working airfield. And the reason for that, it is used for both microlights and also gliders too, and the occasional light aircraft, although that must be a very, very bumpy landing. I don't think the airfield is maintained at all, and there's some debris over the airfield surface, so it's a bit iffy for that, but certainly microlights do use it from time to time. So if you do come here, please make sure you don't park on the wide strips of the airfields themselves, apart from the bit where we've got the trees down by Crowdy Reservoir, which you saw earlier in today's video. RAF Davidstow Moor started being constructed in the late part of 1941, and the construction was relatively easy because you have this flat top to say there was no trees there, and it just meant some minor adjustments of some of the minor roads which fed the farms around this area, and they had to move some of the field boundaries too. But aside from that, construction of it was relatively straightforward, as it probably was in lots of the other places nearby, like St Evell and St Morgan, which is now Newquay or Cornwall Airport, just outside the large town of Newquay here. It started being used in 1942, and it comes under the Coastal Command. Now, if you're not familiar with the Coastal Command, they did aerial reconnaissance and also submarine warfare. So they did work in conjunction with the Royal Navy to some extent, although there was a bit of disagreement with the two, the Navy and the Air Force, always constant rivalries. But so they worked together on that, and it closed at 1945, should I say, shortly after the end of the Second World War, when of course all of these buildings were abandoned. But the story doesn't end there. You remember that I mentioned about cars earlier in the video, and there's a reason for that. Now, after the end of the Second World War, when peacetime once resumed, attentions turned to other diversions and leisure again. In the early 1950s, along with a lot of the abandoned airfields around the southern part of England, this one here was turned into a motor racing circuit for the Motorsport Brigade. Started off with a Formula 3 around about 1952. And it became a very popular circuit because, of course, it's a flat, wide open space. And the other advantage here is that there's no housing around it. So there was no neighbours complaining about the noise. Maybe the sheep protested at some point, perhaps. it became so successful that in the middle of the 1950s, they held 3 Formula One races here. Yes, it's hard to imagine that now. There's no big stadiums like you have at Silverstone and all the other Formula One circuits across the world that we're familiar with now. But this remote spot on Bodmin Moor in North Cornwall, yes, was once used for Formula One. Not only that, if you're into your motorsport at all, you'll know that this site here was the first time that Lotus, the mark of Lotus, that famous brand from over way outside my area in East Anglia, it was the first Formula One race that they ever won, right here in Cornwall. Amazing. Well, that's it for today here on West Country Wanderings from Bodmin Moor in North Cornwall on the remains of RAF Davidstow Moor and its amazing history. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please consider subscribe to the channel. I do produce content from the wider West Country area, the big region. So not only places like Devon and Cornwall, but I also cover Dorset, which I hope to visit again soon, Somerset, North Somerset, Baines, South Gloucestershire, Gloucestershire, Worcestershire, Herefordshire and Wiltshire too. I also run a Facebook group, so if you are interested in the channel, you can request to join the group and there you can share your own photographs and videos from the wider region that I cover here on YouTube. Love to hear from you too, so please drop a comment below, particularly if you have an interest in airfields as well. I'd love to hear about that. Until next time, take care of yourselves, look after yourselves, and I hope to see you on the channel again very, very soon. All the best for now. Take care. Bye-bye.